Les habla Pocho Salcedo y damos la bienvenida a nuestra audiencia en Latinoamérica y de costa a costa aquí en los Estados Unidos continental y en Hawái. Una vez más, explorando con ustedes el ADN de las noticias regionales e internacionales. Hoy conversaremos con un experto internacional sobre una de las ocupaciones más peligrosas del mundo. Una industria donde el número de fatalidades es elevadísima y que sus consecuencias ambientales son igualmente, por no decir otra cosa, abismales. El fragmentar buques se ha convertido en un importante problema de salud ambiental y ocupacional en el mundo. Para tratar este tema de importancia global, hemos invitado a un experto, periodista, economista y abogado muy conocido, Nicola Moularis. Él se conecta con nosotros desde Bruselas, Bélgica. Nicola, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone.
Nicola has been working with the platform since 2014, focusing on legal and policy work, as well as on communications. In 2019, Nicola received the Public Eye Investigation Award for his research work on the shipbreaking business. Nicola holds a LLB and a LLM in law from the University of Udine. In 2014, he graduated the LLM in International Economics and Business Law from the University of Groningen. He speaks English, Italian, and Portuguese.
Well, Nicola, we will start with a broad question. Please tell us about the issues that occupy the agenda of the shipbreaking platform. What kind of issues are at the top of your list?
Well, let me start by underlining the fact that it is important to understand the general context we work in. A lot of corporations and individuals nowadays can be easily and truly be considered as exporters of pollution and social injustice in a modern world that is ruled by a subverted model of a circular economy. Generally speaking, as we all know, a lot of products are produced in Asia, for instance, and then they are consumed and used by the global north and then sent back as waste or sold back to Asia again. This prima facie could look like a truly circular economy, but it is not, because we keep ignoring the two major pillars of a truly circular economy model. The first one is natural capital. We keep using resources, overusing them, and overproducing goods and products and overconsuming them, no matter how toxic or useless they are. Another pillar that we keep ignoring is cost internalization. We keep forgetting as society the fact that human history is a history of cost externalization at the expenses of vulnerable communities and the environment. We have always succeeded in creating pollution heavens strategically located in the weakest parts of the world, mainly in the global south. If we are talking about waste specifically, we created these pollution heavens in Asia, in Africa. And I mean, it's true that waste can be an opportunity for weaker economies. It can provide jobs to less fortunate people. But waste can also quickly become a threat if not handled in a safe and proper way. And what was called job quickly turns out to be exploitation. And the perfect example of, let's say, toxic trade, a new form of colonialism, if you want, a toxic colonialism, are, for instance, the massive electronic waste dumps that can be found in China and Ghana. And another example is shipbreaking, the recycling of toxic end-of-life vessels. which is basically the topic that as NGO Shipbreaking platform, a coalition of 17 organizations located in Asia, Europe, and US are focusing on.
Well, thank you very much for giving us the big picture. And, one will assume from the outside that recycling is much better over sinking or abandoning ships after their economic life is over. That would be a sensible way to reuse steel, iron, aluminum, and plastics. Where do we go wrong with that?
Well, as you rightly mentioned, there are a lot of materials that can be easily recycled or reused while scrapping a ship, a vessel. And keep in mind that we're talking about cruise ships, but we're also talking about big oil tankers. We're talking about container ships, floating offshore structures. I mean, unfortunately, these kind of assets at the end of the life still contain within their structure toxic substances that during a cutting operation can expose workers that do not wear proper protective equipment to high risk, and that can also be easily discharged into an environment, polluting, an entire ecosystem. So roughly 92% of an average ship is steel. Then there's a small percentage made out of furniture and machinery, and all this can be recycled or reused. But then there's also a small percentage, as I said, of hazardous waste embedded within the walls, within the structures of these massive ships.
This coalition of 14 organizations that you work with have an ongoing problem, and also I understand a growing problem. About 1,000 of those ships get retired every year, and the great majority, I understand 70% or more, are broken under very rudimentary conditions in countries with labor and environmental laws are not strong. Just give us a little bit of an insight of what you see.
Yes, indeed. Roughly 1,000 end-of-life vessels are scrapped every year. Like other means of transportation, a ship reaches the end of its life after 20-25 years, and it needs to be recycled. And as you rightly mentioned, 70% in terms of number of ships end up being scrapped under dirty, dangerous, and unjust conditions on the beaches, on the shores of South Asia, specifically in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, and in India, on 3 specific beaches: the beach of Alang, the beach of Gadani, and the beach of Chattogram. If we talk about gross tonnage in terms of, let's say, size of ships, well, that's 90% of gross tonnage that ends up being scrapped under dirty and dangerous condition in these places. The rest of ships are scrapped in a more sustainable way in other parts of the world, mainly Turkey, Europe, and there's also one yard located in Texas, in US.
Well, the International Labor Organization has determined that shipbreaking is one of the major occupational and environmental health hazards globally. Tell us what those operations look like.
Shipbreaking has been considered by the International Labour Organization as one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, and the majority of ships are ramped up onto these muddy flats, the shores in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, where they are broken down by hand by an unskilled migrant workforce. There are risks for the environment and the ecosystem, and there are also risks for the workers themselves and the local communities that are located in the surroundings of these shipbreaking beaches. Why? Because during cutting operations, toxics are discharged at sea or on the beach, or just dumped in the vicinity of the yards. and also because the working conditions are extremely dangerous, not only due to the lack of personal protective equipment, and I'm talking about masks, helmets, gloves, boots, proper cutting equipment, but also because of the method that is used to cut these ships, which is the beaching method, which can be considered the worst available methods to scrap a ship nowadays. These structures are basically stuck in these muds, and then workers do not use heavy lifting gear to lift the cut blocks, and in most of the yards in South Asia, these blocks fall thanks to a sort of so-called gravity method in the sea or onto the beach. And of course, there are high risks for workers, like being crushed by falling objects, being crushed by these falling blocks. And also very common, unfortunately, are explosions due to the fact that these ships are not properly pre-cleaned before being cut with gas torches. And then also another big risk is falling from great heights for these workers that are not properly secured, and they are working at really, really high and significant heights.
Those operations, mainly in East Asia, some in Turkey and China, are rarely accountable for the negative impact caused to their labor force and to the beaches or to the ocean in general. So ship owners have found a way to circumvent existing laws, and governments do not execute the laws that are on the books. Why is that? It's too profitable, or just there are too many other issues going on in those countries that this is a minor issue for them?
Well, I think that we are actually facing, in this case, the typical case of religion of profits, where legislation is not properly enforced by the recycling states, but also by the ship owning countries, where these shipping companies that are selling these vessels are located. And the part of the legislation and also part of these administration, governments, entities protect an already wealthy global elite, the shipping industry, with its also other linked stakeholders. And all these practices take place, unfortunately, at the expenses of vulnerable communities and the environment in the other side of the world. So it's definitely a shared responsibility. Shipping companies should be responsible of dismantling or taking care of their old fleet in a proper way. And that's not the case, because ship owners, shipping companies can earn a lot of money by selling these vessels to the worst yards in the world. And then local governments, as you rightly point out, there are definitely other issues in this country, but still shipbreaking is and should be high up in the agenda. But part of the government, part of the authorities that should enforce this legislation are complicit. And it's quite difficult to change this system. As an organization, we also try to push, let's say, countries, the exporting countries, mainly located in the global north, to enforce international legislation that should be applied in the case. But sometimes we encounter, let's say, difficulties, even in convincing Greece or other member states of European Union to properly interpret and enforce legislation that exists.
We're speaking with Nicola Moliner. We will be right back, and we will go through the process of how this happens, how there is a system that is set up to bypass controls, to bypass ownership, and to detach companies and operators from responsibilities. We will be right back. Bueno, y aprovechamos esta oportunidad para saludar a 3 de nuestras estaciones en los Estados Unidos: Belmont Media Center en Belmont, Massachusetts, Denver Community Media en Colorado y MNN Network y sus 5 canales en la ciudad de Manhattan, Nueva York. Gracias por tenernos en su programación. And we are back. We are with Nicola Molinar. He joins us from Brussels, Belgium. He is a spokesperson for the Shipbreaking platform. And we've been looking at an issue that is so important and one that we don't know too much about up to this point. Thank you for joining us, Nicola. I'm going to ask you about how this process works. There are flags of convenience and relationships with the so-called cash buyers. There is migrant workers. You've been in the midst of that, so please give us a snapshot of how this process works and how damaging it is to people's lives.
Yeah, a shipping company or a ship owner that has an asset to scrap and wants to scrap it in a proper way normally contacts the ship recycling yard, the selected ship recycling yard directly. But when we talk about the hundreds and hundreds of ships that every year reach the shores of Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan to be scrapped under dirty and dangerous condition, well, we are facing, let's say, a different pattern. Shipping companies do not sell these vessels directly to yards located on the beaches of South Asia, but use the services of intermediaries, middlemen, scrap dealers, so-called cash buyers. A shipping company, therefore, sells directly a vessel to a cash buyer and receives a payment in cash. And then the responsibility for the last voyage is literally in the hands of this intermediary. Then normally these intermediaries, for financial reasons, but also to circumvent existing legislation and muddy the waters in order to prevent investigations by us or by authorities on the marquee deals, not only change the name of the vessel, not only re-register the vessel under postbox companies located often in tax havens, but also reflag these vessels under flags of convenience that are well known for poorly implementing and enforcing international maritime legislation. So flags that are black or gray listed by memorandum of understanding that are established regionally by port authorities. Flags like Palau, flags like Comoros, flag like St. Kitts and Nevis, flag like Gabon. So basically, it's a whole system in place to facilitate, this sort of like a shady, toxic trade. And then the cash buyers themselves resell these vessels for like making a sort of small profit margin to the yards. And some of these cash buyers, there are not many in the world, that basically I can say that 3-4 companies control roughly 2/3 of the market. Well, some of them might have direct ties, family ties or business ties, quite strong with some of the yards in South Asia.
Nicola, what legislation exists internationally to combat this practice, and how is legally, what's the legal framework to deal with situations like this?
Right now, the only international or the main international applicable legislation is the Basel Convention, which in general regulates the transboundary movement of hazardous waste between countries. End-of-life ships are considered waste when the ship owner intends to scrap them, because ships contain within their structures a lot of hazardous substances, such as asbestos, such as PCBs, such as TBTs, oil sludges, mercury, radioactive material. Unfortunately, this legislation is extremely easy to circumvent. Ship owners, by simply hiding their intention to scrap the vessel, are able to remain off the authorities' radars, and they do not declare that the ship is going for scrapping. Therefore, the last voyage of the ship, the last movement of the ship, is not regulated strictly by the International Convention. Sometimes authorities do not act indeed because they were tricked by ship owners and shipping companies. Sometimes also authorities turn a blind eye on these practices, even though they were alerted about an upcoming illegal shipment by us or by whistleblowers. Now, the shipping industry itself, within the International Maritime Organization, which is a UN agency, tried to come up with its own instrument to regulate ship recycling, which is the Hong Kong Convention, which was adopted in 2009, so more than 10 years ago, but is not yet in force. As an organization, together also with the UN Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights and more than 100 NGOs, we strongly criticize, and we keep strongly criticizing this new legislative tool, because we believe it's the perfect tool to rubber stamp current substandard practices that take place in South Asia. Why? Because the Hong Kong Convention, for instance, does not prohibit, does not ban the use of the worst possible shipbreaking method, which is beaching, and also because the Hong Kong Convention is based on flag state jurisdiction. So in an ideal scenario in the future, when this convention will come into force, who will be the countries that will have to enforce it and make sure that this law is followed? Well, will be the black and gray listed flags that we mentioned before. So in the ideal scenario, we will have a combination of Palau and Bangladesh, or Pakistan and St. Kitts and Nevis, that will have to guarantee environmental protection and the respect of human rights. All countries that are well known for, let's say, not acting properly on this issue. Fortunately, at regional level, some initiatives, legal initiatives, took place, and one of these initiatives led to the creation of the so-called EU Ship Recycling Regulation, which is based on the Hong Kong Convention, which we criticize and we deem weak, but the EU Ship Recycling Regulation goes beyond the Hong Kong Convention. In which way? By providing an independent auditing scheme, an inspection scheme to guarantee that the yards approved under this regulation follow so the basic standards in terms of like social standards, environmental standards. And the ship recycling regulation, most importantly, covers not only the cutting of the vessel, as the Hong Kong Convention does, but covers also the downstream waste management, which is an important phase of ship recycling that is, irresponsibly left out by the IMO during the creation of the Hong Kong Convention. And it is important to note that the ship recycling regulation has this list of approved ship recycling yards that are located also in third countries, so not only in Europe. And so far, to date, some yards in Turkey have been deemed compliant with this regulation, and also one yard in US, in Brownsville, in Texas.
Very good, Nicola. Just as we close the conversation, what is that one concept that the general audience should remember, and what us as the general public should do to support the efforts of organizations like yours?
Well, we should definitely remember an interesting fact, the fact that more than 90% of the goods and products we consume come to us by ship. So shipping is a crucial part of nowadays economy in the way we live. And it is important, in my opinion, to highlight the issue of shipbreaking because it's still, let's say, unknown to most of the population, the world population. We are talking about one of the most murky and shady businesses out there that involves a lot of rich corporations, rich companies, rich individuals. So what can you do as a general public to support us? Well, definitely raise awareness about this issue, share, for instance, content that we publish on our website and on social media. You can also personally, individually put pressure on your governments. I mean, a lot of ships actually depart from South America and US to go to these beaches in South Asia. I mean, more than 50 Brazilian-owned vessels were scrapped in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan in the last 10 years. More than 80 South American-owned vessels ended up there. More than 200 vessels owned by American companies were scrapped under dirty conditions on these beaches. So you can definitely write to your own governments and your own representatives and try to basically ask the right and maybe uncomfortable questions on why shipping companies located in your country are still allowed to externalize their costs for the sake of profit to vulnerable communities and the environment in the global south.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Generalmente lo que no sabemos nos hace más daño. El problema de despedazar buques es un asunto casi que estaría bajo la detección de radar si no fuera por organizaciones como Shipbreaking Platform. El abuso laboral, incluso a niños, así como las consecuencias ambientales tan dañinas por esta práctica, deben ser visibilizadas para el bien de todos. Aunque estemos al otro lado del océano, es una condición básica de humanidad. Y es importantísimo que tengamos conciencia sobre estos temas. Hasta una próxima oportunidad, cuando juntos exploremos el ADN de las noticias. Gracias por el privilegio de ser parte de su compañía.